What is good, world? Welcome to another episode of the Tyler Hill Podcast. It is our fourth Friday episode, which means you just get me today every fourth Friday. And we add an extra podcast where I just riff a little bit. I talk about maybe things that I'm learning or am passionate about. Maybe there's a little message that I want to share with you today. And so here we are. Don't miss out on the last couple Wednesday episodes, though, my friends. They have been great. Some really good interviews from spiritual leaders, entrepreneurs. It's just been really fun to see. So don't miss out on the other Wednesday long-form interview podcasts. Also, it goes without saying, I think, but would you be willing to, if you haven't yet, subscribe and like and comment and review this podcast? It goes a long way, and especially right now, while I am working on getting my book published, to see just a little bit of engagement via this podcast or on Instagram, it really supports me more than you know, especially in this season. Today I wanted to talk just a little bit about spiritual practice. What happens in spiritual practice? Why is it important? And I really not just wanted to talk about what's important, but I wanted to share just a little bit about some of the things that I hear in my office as a spiritual director, some things people maybe accuse me of, believe it or not, online, and what has become important to me in regards to my spiritual practice. And I think the reason I want to bring this up is even somebody I really respect, recently made a post that was definitely not targeted at me, but it could have been. And it just got me thinking a little bit about my spiritual practice and what I teach and what I encourage and what I present in the virtual space. And she was just talking about how she's so sick of kind of people who just are always offering their courses. They are always showing people their daily routines. What they don't want in this world very much anymore, because it's so suffocating and annoying, and often it's not helpful, is just gurus that are constantly projecting, do it my way, or you're not going to make it. Do it my way, or you're not going to be enlightened. Do it my way, or you're not going to be very healthy. This sort of oversaturation, which I'm self-aware enough to know that I'm part of this, right? This oversaturation of people who offer what some would say are life hacks, or people who present as helpers or gurus or whatever. And please know, I am absolutely not a guru. I am not enlightened. I am a helper, but I am on the path just as much as anybody else. But there seems to be, I think, two camps that form, especially on the internet. And to be fair, this is what the internet often does, is it creates camps, this or that, the dualism posture that often exists in social media, that there's sort of a battle or a war or maybe even a misunderstanding between two different ways people view daily routines, spiritual practice, physical practice, the ways in which we engage with what we do on a daily basis, right? So on one side, you get people who, share their morning routines, and they talk about their cold plunging and their breath work. That's me, right? Talking to people about what to eat on a daily basis, or if you just read the Psalms, or just read a gospel, or just read the Proverbs, or just if you only did walking meditation every day, then you would do this, or I drink these electrolytes every day, or the collagen, or the creatine, or the whatever it is, just do this every day. Just do this practice and you will make it, and you will be whole, you will be better, you will experience the love of God for you. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like there is this aspect to what we practice, we become, right? That's in basic definitions, that's really what spiritual formation is. That is what life formation is, right? It's this idea, it's this practice that what we do every day, we ultimately become. We are alchemists in that way. We are in many ways in control of what we do every day, and that ultimately impacts how the world around us and within us changes. If I choose to eat pizza every day, that will very literally form my body in a particular way. If I choose to consume angry, fearful, vengeful content on the internet every day, that will begin to shape my mind and my perspective in that lane, right? If I meditate and cultivate silence, or if I Sabbath every week, there is a reality that I don't think can be argued with, that what we practice, we ultimately become. And so to talk about what we practice is a really, really big deal. But so easily, when we have a world filled with teachers, filled with gurus, filled with people who are constantly telling us what to do and how to do it, that can very quickly transition into a very dangerous mindset and perspective. I know that I have been incredibly overwhelmed at certain times in my life by the overwhelm and the addiction, the passionate pursuit of doing all of the right things every day, of having the perfect daily routine, of having the most elite spiritual practices, of having to do the most perfect breath work. All of a sudden, taking spiritual formation very seriously can become a hurricane of overwhelm that eventually causes damage. And in the name of spiritual health or physical health, we can ultimately and oftentimes find ourselves doing damage to ourselves. So why then does this happen, and what's really the problem? I could entirely see why so many people, like my friend a couple weeks ago, say, listen, all these gurus telling me to just sign up for their course and learn how to change their mindset is so annoying. I just want to sit and be. I just want to sit and exist. I don't want to be told what to do. In fact, I don't want to do anything. Well, yeah, absolutely. When we are filled with a world that is overwhelmingly telling us what to do and how to do it, of course, the response then is, I need to sit. I need to chill. I need to not do something. Which begs these giant questions, right? Like in the contemplative kind of vein that I tend to live within, there are constant calls, constant teachings, constant invitations to sit into silence, to Sabbath, to not do anything, right? If we're not what we have, if we're not what we do, if we're not what other people say about us, then we don't have to do anything, right? We don't have to do too much. But on the same sense, if we don't do anything, we are formed in no way at all. Apathy and just floating through life doesn't help us become all that we were made to be, and not just in an up and to the right type posture or perspective, right? I'm not talking about having to get a million times better every day and necessarily making quantum leaps in our life, although I am also a big fan of that. I love personal development, and I think we need to consider that more often. There is this aspect of how do we integrate silence, stillness, trusting in the slow work of God with pursuing things with fervor, chasing our dreams, becoming the best versions of ourselves, healing, right? To just do nothing probably won't heal us in the way that we need to be healed. But if we do too much, Lord knows that we won't be healed either. We will only do ourselves more damage. So what is then the way to move forward? Obviously, there's to some degree, we have to meet in the middle. But also, I think it's less about learning how to just balance it all. In another podcast, I'll tell you about my disdain for the word balance. I don't ever think we should pursue balance. Balance doesn't work. But I don't think this is a question of how do we balance both like spiritual practice and just sitting and doing nothing, but more so saying, what is the holistic way we can look at this? Like, what is the place for all of these things, right? What is the place where working to become the best versions of ourselves, waking up an extra hour early so we can exercise or do our meditations or our breath work. Where does that sit with not trying to prove anything to anyone? Where does that sit when it comes to not trying to earn our belovedness through our work or through everything that God is trying to ask us to do or to be? Could it be that it's not, do I forsake my spiritual practices for the sake of rest, or that I just rest so much and forsake my spiritual practices? What if spiritual practice and spiritual growth and rest and taking a step back and just being open-handed with it is actually the same thing? What if our pursuit and our development, our cold plunging, our Bible reading, our reading of other holy wisdom texts, our prayer life, and also our entrepreneurial endeavors, our silent retreats, and our conferences where we learn a lot, I don't think it's this or that. I think they're honestly the same thing if we let them. If we can let them be the same thing. And here's what I mean by that. In anything we do, I think it's healthy when it brings us back to our center. And the truth is we can do or not do either side of this coin, and it can either bring us to the center or not. So, for example, I can go to a conference that is not very silent, that has a ton of education, that has a ton of networking, that has a ton of things to do, has a ton of things that you might need to buy or spend your time on. You don't get a lot of rest at a conference. There's a lot of up and to the right energy at a conference. And in the right mindset, that can bring me back to center. It can remind me what my purpose is. It can give me strategy and focus so that I can move forward in my life in the right direction. Spending some energy in a forward moving place could really bring me back to center. But in the same sense, and this is the case for me a lot of the time, when I go to these environments where there's a lot to do, I learn new things about what I'm supposed to do, it can knock me off center. I can think, oh, I'm not good enough. I don't podcast as good as these people. I don't have as many clients as them. I don't charge enough. My social media sucks. It knocks me off of center when I start thinking I have to go do more and be more and have more in order to be accomplished or in order to belong. It takes me away from my center. And what do I mean by center? What I really mean is my belovedness. It knocks me off of the pursuit of being who I am, which is beloved. I'm not better because of anything. I'm not worse because of anything. I am and always have been beloved. And so the question might not be, do I engage in more practices or not? The question might be, do these practices actually bring me to center or not? The same could be said for relieving ourselves of coaching or conferences or up into the right modalities, if you will. Sometimes going to sit in silence is not the thing that you need. Maybe you need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to go read a book. Maybe sitting in silence and doing nothing only perpetuates the laziness or the slothfulness that has kept you far from becoming who you want to be. And you actually need to get up and do some work, right? But also for those who are overworked, silence might bring them right to center. You might be so busy that you've not been able to ever consider in the last handful of months or weeks your passions, your belovedness, your identity as a daughter or a son of a divine mother. Silence and quiet, resting, not trying to work, might very well bring you to the center. My point is, whether we engage in one thing or not isn't the question. I think the question is, how do these things bring me back to center? For me, a lot of the time, when I actually go to work, because I have a lot of big spaces in my schedule where I don't do much, right? Like, whether I'm going on a silent retreat or whether I'm at leading other retreats or things like this where I get to do a lot of teaching and I get a lot of time off, or maybe if I'm off on a writing project, there's something that happens when I show back up at my day job, which is meeting with people one-on-one. where I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I do what I do. When I get time away, sometimes it takes me off of center. For me, the rhythm of continuing to show up at work on a regular basis is really important. But let's ask this question, and then we'll get, we'll keep going. This is really fun. I think this really matters as well, though, when we think about other practices, say about things like cold plunging or things like how we diet or the supplements we take. There are some people that I work with that are so overwhelmed at doing it right, that are so burdened by their daily protocols that there is nothing centering about it. The overwhelm of having to do breath work and cold plunges and sauna and making sure they take this protein and this supplement, and it becomes 9:30 or 10:30 in the morning, and they've never had a sense to even be in touch with themselves because they've been so in touch with the protocol. And this so often takes them off of center. The question isn't if the protocol good or bad. The science in many ways would say that sitting in the cold is great. I mean, the science is overwhelming, right? Like taking vitamins and supplements and most of the time is very helpful. But at what cost, right? If you're taking these things and your blood work looks great, but you're entirely miserable, then it's time to reevaluate. For me, getting in the cold is an absolute necessity. Nothing brings me to center more than being in the cold. And so for me, when I share on my Instagram, for example, my daily practice of getting in the cold and doing my breath work, whether it's Wim Hof breathing or something else, it's not necessarily that I am trying to tell everybody, do it my way or else. And I would suggest that a lot of the people we see maybe offering their practices, they might say that because they believe it so much. But what if we saw it not just as much of like, okay, there's another thing I have to do, but rather it's someone practicing going back to their center, going back to their identity as the beloved, going back to the person who isn't trying to be anything other than what they are. You see, a good spiritual practice, whether it's filled with a list of to-dos or if it's wildly empty. A good spiritual practice or a good life practice, whether we're hiring courses from gurus and thought experts or if we're just doing things all by ourselves. The metric is not which way we go. I think the metric is, does this bring us to our center? Are we working from a place of love? Are we working from a place of abundance? Are we doing the things we're doing because it's coming from an abundance of divine flow? Or are we doing things because we're trying to fill a gap? Earlier today on my Instagram, I had made the point that the soil upon which we plant our seeds is really important. You see, so many of us plant our stories in bad soil. We don't plant our seeds in a soil of centeredness. We say, well, I'm not good enough, so I have to do all these things to become good enough. I'm not rich enough, so I have to do all these things to get more rich because until I get this amount of money, then my life isn't very important or worthy. Or if I just get this many followers on the internet, then I will be impactful. Then I will be more of who I want to be. Well, that's not working from a place of centeredness. That's working from a place of scarcity. That's working from a place of separation. And that story sucks. That is a story that will produce bad fruit. But when we go about our life, our physical practices, our spiritual practices from a place of abundance, from a place of connectedness to the divine, that story rules. That story takes us to a beautiful, beautiful place. If we already know we're beloved, then we can get into the cold because we are beloved. If we believe that our body is good, then the way in which we take care of our body is good, which means we don't have to be overwhelmed by a protocol. These practices must be things that take us back to center. This is the place that we have to operate from. So the question, I don't think, is, do we partake in life hacks? Do we partake in spiritual practice? Of course we do. Everything we do is a spiritual practice. Everything we do is forming us in one way or another. The question is, are we being formed from our center or to our center? Or are we working from a place of scarcity and just doing things because we are supposed to? And that will never work. So, my friends, I think my encouragement simply is, are the things that you do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, do they come from center and do they point you to your center, or do they throw you askew and throw you off from your center? Are you overwhelmed by the things that you feel like you have to do to connect with God? Well, it's probably not from a healthy center. Do you find yourself, after a little bit of breath work, connected to your body and to your family in ways in which you weren't before? That's probably coming from center. Now, one thing I want to make very clear is these disciplines, these practices, it doesn't mean they're easy. And just because something is hard or difficult or takes discipline doesn't mean it's not from your center. I'm talking much more about where we are coming from when it comes to why we're doing what we're doing and where does it come from. Yep, practices, disciplines are definitely hard. And just because it's hard, it doesn't mean it's not from our center. So are you working from belovedness? Are you practicing from belovedness? Another way to analyze this is you could say, am I doing this because it's helpful, because it's beautiful and good, or am I doing this because I'm supposed to, or because I should? Shoulds and supposed tos are probably never, I think I could say that, shoulds and supposed tos are never from center. You know, for a long time, I didn't want to exercise, and I didn't want to eat well. I just didn't want to. And I was always supposed to, and I should, and it was healthy for me to do it. But because it wasn't coming from a centered place, from an actual passion to be healthy, it never stuck and it never really worked. But now, over the last few years, because I want to be healthy, because there's a centeredness to my longing to be healthy for my friends and my family, and then I became vegan and I started running and I started doing all of the practices that I do, my breath work and the cold plunging, it's come from a different place. Before I changed my health, I still should have done it, but it never stuck and it never worked because it wasn't coming from a healthy center. So my friends, may you feel the freedom today as you move forward, not to engage in spiritual practices from shoulds or have-tos. That's like unhealthy, religious, cult-like behavior. Now there are practices, though, that bring you back to center, and only you can know what they are. So don't engage in these practices from a should or a have to, but from a want to. From a this will ultimately help me. And then you engage, you pursue, you be disciplined as you pursue them. But the ones that come from your center, the ones that bring you back to your center, these are the practices that will ultimately bring you to life, liberation, freedom, and belovedness. As we start to wrap up here, I'd love to read you a quote from Pastor Rich Velotis. He says, "No spiritual discipline can make God love you. It's too late for that. God already loves you. But spiritual disciplines help us live in God's love and offer it to others." Right? So working a spiritual discipline or a physical discipline not from a place of centerness would say, I'm doing this so that people will love me, so that God will love me. But engaging in our life and our spiritual practices from a place of centeredness will say, I'm doing this so that I can remember that God loves me. I'm going to the scriptures, I'm going to prayer, I'm going to meditation to remember what's already true. That is working out of centeredness, and that's what I'm inviting you to today. So if there's a course you need to buy it. And if you're overwhelmed by things to do, take a friggin' break. Because the question is not whether this or that is too much or too little. The question is, what will help you holistically come to center? And you, my friends, are the only one that can answer that. Whether or not I tell you how impactful the cold is for you or not, ultimately you have to decide what will bring you to center and act out of that. So, may you find that center. May you find practices that lead you to that center. And may you get to engage in those practices on a regular basis because you get to and you love to, not because you have to. My friends, thank you for spending time with me today here on this Fourth Friday episode of the Tyler Hill Podcast. Again, if you would like and subscribe or follow me on Instagram, The Tyler, that would mean the world. We'll see you on Monday for your next Monday morning blessing. Until then, grace and peace to you.